There can be only one, the first movie said. But then it made a ton of money, and Hollywood wanted a second movie, and suddenly mortality wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and a planet called Zeist followed. Not that you'd know it these days, since you had to catch Highlander 2 in theatres to experience the full horror of the world building. Maybe they should have stopped with the first Highlander. Immortality comes with a whole bunch of problems for the writer. There is a complexity to creating immortal characters while still retaining the engagement of your audience in the story. And that is what I want to talk about today. The 5 biggest pitfalls of immortal characters and how to avoid them. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. First, we'll start with lowering the stakes. This is probably your biggest and most disastrous of pitfalls. Lowering the stakes happens when your immortal character can't be hurt in battle, they can't be killed, they can't be hurt, and because they can't be killed, the pressure of a combat scene is much less intense. The risk isn't as great. However, this is a very overcomable problem, and I'm going to discuss it using the example of the HBO show Superman and Lois. In this show, Superman is, well, Superman. He can fly, he can shoot laser beams, he can breathe ice, he can't be shot, you can throw a nuke at him and he'll still be fine. The only thing that hurts him is green kryptonite. That's literally his only weakness. But the show keeps the stakes and the tension high through his family. Superman has a wife and 2 sons, and they are at risk. His wife Lois in season 4, spoiler for season 4, so be aware. In season 4, Lois gets cancer, and there is nothing Sup can do about it. It's a disease, and he has to cope with that happening to someone that he loves. His sons go through traumatic times, and he has to be there for them as a father while balancing that with his job as a superhero. The stakes become not about his life or death, but about his emotional investment in the characters around him. Emotional stakes can be just as potent, if not more so than physical stakes. I promise you, people will cry as much for an emotional stake as they will for a physical one. Probably even more. So, in terms of avoiding the lowering of the stakes, shift the stakes away from the physical and into another area, whether that be emotional stakes, financial stakes, philosophical stakes, or some other sphere of challenges for the character. But the stakes is the pitfall everyone brings up when talking about immortals, and honestly, it's the most easy one to counter. So, let's leave the mundane behind us and return to my little rant about Highlander and talk about pitfall 2, inconsistent world building. So, if you've never seen Highlander 2 in theatres, which I assume you didn't because it was a long time ago and it was a train wreck of a movie and they made the Renegade cut in between and everything else, Highlander 2 tried to world build the immortals from Highlander the first movie as aliens from the planet Zeist. Yes, Zeist, like zest. Zesty lemons, zesty immortals, mix them in a stew, anyway. In Highlander 1, Connor McLeod had won the Highlander Games. He was now mortal and would live out his mortal life. Then in Highlander 2, there's a hole in the ozone layer and a corporation is keeping the shield up to protect Earth, even though they no longer need the shield because the ozone layer has recovered. So far, fine. It's a 90s storyline. It's fine for the 90s. But then, with no warning whatsoever, we take a straight turn into sci-fi cheese. Highlanders are suddenly from the planet Zeist, and Connor has a flashback to another Highlander, and there are more Highlanders that come to Earth, which you think would reignite the whole Highlander conflict. There can be only one. But it's just such a mess of a storyline that you gotta throw it all out. It's terrible. It's so inconsistent with these people living their immortal lives on Earth. It is so poorly integrated with the existing world building. It's just atrocious. Now, part of this is because they were trying to world build in a sequel. But Immortals do present a problem for your world building because they could theoretically be present at any moment in history. They could be there at any given point in time, and they would remember things about the history of your world that you as the writer need to consider. If you recollect my previous episode on Immortals, link in the information card, I discussed the benefits of using an immortal as a repository of knowledge, like how Elrond speaks about the original Fall of Man, where the Ring of Doom wasn't tossed into the volcano. It's a great benefit of immortal characters to have this vast knowledge repository in your story. But you have to remember to world build consistently in order to reap that benefit. What were the Immortals doing during the big flashpoints of your world? Were they involved in any of these historical events? Do they remember anything about those times? Did they hear rumors about it? What knowledge do they have locked up in their minds that could wreck your plot? Because that's the big thing. If they know stuff about your current plot situation that could fundamentally change it because of their historical knowledge, if there is hidden knowledge from the past, why doesn't the Immortal share it? If they know what it is, why don't they reveal it? And if they don't know, why don't they know? Now, these are things you can absolutely solve. They could have forgotten, they could have been not present. It's absolutely easy to address these things, but you have to address them. You have to think about a reason why and just put it in there. And please, don't try and shoehorn them in. Don't pull a Highlander 2. No one wants another planet of Zeist. Me, least of all. Okay, let's move on to 3. Limited character development. One of my biggest problems with immortal characters is how they are often depicted as always cynical, having seen it all, with very little growth in their arc as a character. They don't expand in any meaningful way. Now, it could be the immortal character is intended to be a stationary character. It has a flat character arc that does not grow and serves as a mirror for your other characters. In that case, this isn't the pitfall. You've successfully avoided it. You created the character to be a flat arc and to stand in contrast to your dynamic characters. That works 100%. But if the intent with this immortal character is not to be a flat character, then even an immortal who has seen it all, who has been around for millennia, they still need a growth arc. A great example of a show where they avoided this trap is Lucifer. Lucifer had an entire growth arc over 6 seasons. For the devil, no less. Yes, it's a subtle growth arc because an immortal has to change slowly. Someone who's been alive for all of history would naturally evolve at a slower pace. But Lucifer is not the same character in season 6 as he was in season 1. He has become more aware of his actions and has grown over the course of the series. By the end, he is a much more responsible devil, as we see in the way that he ultimately ends the series, not by ascending into heaven, but by becoming a therapist for the lost souls of hell. It was a subtle and really well executed growth arc that took us through all the steps, despite the character's immortality, and resulted in a fully realized story. So even if it's an immortal character, they need to have a growth arc. And if you've enjoyed the first 3 pitfalls, hit the thumbs up button, and let's move on to unrealistic reactions to mortality. This is actually 2 pitfalls in a trench coat. First, people often write an immortal as extremely detached due to their age because they don't want to get hurt. They completely withdraw from the world. And while this makes sense in the narrative, and I've argued that same point in a live stream, it does disconnect the immortal from the human experience, which in turn disconnects the immortal from the audience in a very profound way. Now, if you're using that as a narrative device, this can work great. If that is part of your plot, perfect. But if you're just writing the immortal that way because that's how they would be, it's going to be hard for your audience to connect with the immortal. And the second pitfall in the trench coat is the way that the immortal reacts to mortals around them and the pace of their lives. One of the best scenes in Rings of Power was when Elrond and Durin have this conflict because Elrond hasn't visited Durin in decades. And this happened because the years for an elf pass slowly, flowing by in a way that doesn't match the frenetic pace of the mortal races like the dwarves. And this creates a conflict between Durin and Elrond because of Elrond's immortality leads him to neglect his mortal friend. This is a legit way for an immortal to act, and it creates a great sense of conflict. And that's why I say these 2 reactions dovetail. If the immortal withdraws, what are you going to do with that withdrawal? If the immortal interacts with mortals, what are you going to do with that interaction? What is their feeling going to be when the mortals die, get married, have children? Are they going to interact with mortal lives at the pace of mortals or at their pace and interacting with mortal lives? This is, again, none of this is an impossible problem to overcome. This is a thing that you need to think about when you're writing immortals, a way to deal with how they deal with the short lives of immortality. Maybe they deeply care for people, but what happens to them when enough funerals pass? And that brings us to our final pitfall, number 5, the power imbalance. With immortal characters, it's very easy to fall into the Mary Sue, Gary Stu trap, where the immortal character is completely overpowered. Maybe they aren't the type of character to experience any ethical dilemmas either, so they easily manipulate or harm the people around them without any significant consequences. This can turn these characters into very unsympathetic characters who get whatever they want because they are so out of balance with the rest of the cast. They are simply too overpowered. Of course, this is a general problem with overpowered characters. See my video on how to deal with overpowered characters. But it's especially easy to fall into that trap with immortals because of their inherent experience and immortality. A good way to avoid this trap is to limit the immortal's ability to be involved, whether due to an ethical dilemma, a limitation in their power, or other reasons. A show that handles this well is Doctor Who. In Doctor Who, while you know that the Doctor can pretty much survive anything or can regenerate, he has 2 hearts, he's very clever, he has the psychic paper, he has his sonic screwdriver, he can regenerate, etc. And of course he has the incredible TARDIS. he often chooses not to interfere due to the timeline limitations. He is frequently faced with the ethical dilemmas of what he can change without causing harm, and this puts him into a position the audience can relate to. And the audience, of course, also relates to the human companion traveling with the Doctor, whom the Doctor cares deeply about. This creates a setup where we are attached to the Doctor through the affection of the human companion. Even though the Doctor is overpowered, he is not unethical. He cares about his companion, and that care represents a vulnerability. To overcome the pitfall of overpowered immortals, make sure your immortal character has a weakness. At the very least, give them a reason to engage in ethical dilemmas and show why these dilemmas would present a challenge to the character. And this creates philosophical stakes that add depth to the story, tying us back to that first lowering of the stakes. And those are my 5 pitfalls of immortal characters to watch out for. Be careful of your stakes, keep the world building consistent, make sure they have a growth arc, unless they're your flat character. Understand their reactions to mortal characters and what you want to achieve out of those reactions for your narrative, and limit the power balance problem, or address the power balance problem. I think if you can keep an eye on those 5 issues, your immortals will turn out just fine. If you enjoyed this episode, maybe check out my episode on healing in fantasy. Watching one of these videos afterwards really does help the channel grow, as it tells the algorithm that all of my back catalogue are worth watching. If you want to support the channel financially, you can buy my epic fantasy books on the links down below, or you can join the channel on YouTube for lots of cool perks, like including shoutouts like this one to Lupex Lakeshire, my newest member of the Build It in Stone level. If you want to connect to a great world building community, there's a Discord link down below, and I will see you soon for another episode for Just in Time Worlds, where we build what we need when we need it.